Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the absolute biggest power shifts in modern history. I mean, think about it. We live in a world that's literally run by software. The apps on your phone, the browser you're using right now, even the operating systems running global financial markets. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when the physical machine, the hardware, was the whole shebang, and software, well, it was just kind of an afterthought. So we're going to explore exactly how Bill Gates and Microsoft permanently flipped the tech world power dynamic from hardware to software, and in doing so, built the personal computing revolution we know today. The Catalyst narrative, how software built the PC revolution.
Now, when we look back at the origins of these massive tech shifts, we usually expect to find these grand, meticulously planned strategies that took decades to pull off, right? But history is rarely that neat. In fact, I really want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this. How did a high-stakes bluff and a relatively tiny $50,000 purchase trigger the entire personal computing revolution? It is just wild how these tiny butterfly effect moments completely altered the course of human history.
To really appreciate how crazy this revolution was, we've got to look at the starting line. Back in the late 1960s and early 70s, computers were nothing like the sleek little devices we carry around today. We are talking about the mainframe era. Systems like the General Electric computers or DEC PDP mini-computers were absolute behemoths. They literally took up entire rooms and cost an absolute fortune. Because they were so massive and expensive, they were pretty much off-limits to everyday people, locked away like vaults in university basements or corporate research labs. During this era, hardware was the undisputed king. The metal, the wiring, the sheer physical processing power. That was where everyone thought all the value was.
But that exclusivity didn't stop a group of teenagers up in Seattle. At Lakeside Prep School, young Bill Gates and Paul Allen got their hands on a teletype Model 33 ASR terminal. And fun fact, this was actually funded by the school's Mothers Club rummage sale. This little terminal was their gateway. They became completely obsessed. I mean, they were literally banned from the Computer Center Corporation for a whole summer because they got caught exploiting bugs in a PDP-10 operating system just to score free computer time. But they actually turned that hacker mindset into a massive advantage, eventually trading those bug-finding skills for the compute time they were so desperate for. Gates spent this time intensely studying source code, Fortran, Lisp, machine language. He developed this deep fascination with how a machine would always execute software code perfectly as long as the instructions were right.
And then comes the spark. In January 1975, a magazine called Popular Electronics featured this brand new machine on its cover, the MITS Altair 8800. This was a totally groundbreaking microcomputer based on the Intel 8080 CPU. And the moment Gates and Allen saw this, they instantly recognized the huge potential. But here's the catch. While the Altair was this revolutionary piece of hardware, it was, at the end of the day, just a metal box with some flashing lights. It had zero software. No instructions to actually make it useful for the average person. It was basically an empty vessel just waiting to be filled.
So, what makes this foundational moment so incredible is that it was built on a massive, frantic bluff. Gates and Allen actually called MITS President Ed Roberts and boldly claimed they were already working on a basic software interpreter for the Altair. The real truth? They didn't even own an Altair, and they hadn't written a single line of code for it yet. They literally just wanted to gauge his interest. Well, when Roberts agreed to a demonstration, it kicked off what was basically a high-stakes tech heist. Over just a few frantic weeks, they scrambled to write an Altair emulator on a completely different mini-computer and then wrote the basic interpreter for it. And amazingly, when they flew down to Albuquerque to demo the thing, it worked perfectly on the actual hardware for the very first time.
That wild success brilliantly sets up the massive cultural clash that happened next. Microsoft's Altair Basic was a huge hit, but pre-market copies leaked out, and computer hobbyists just started sharing it for free. So in February 1976, Gates wrote an open letter to hobbyists. It was super controversial at the time, but looking back, it was completely prophetic. He essentially pointed out that because people were copying the software without paying for it, they were going to completely destroy the incentive for developers to actually sit down and write good code. This moment right here cemented Gates' core philosophy. Software wasn't just some free add-on to hardware. Software held immense standalone value, and the developers who spent weeks building the architecture absolutely deserved to be paid. Now, to fully grasp the gravity of what comes next, we have to talk about the biggest architectural bottleneck of that era, the operating system. For a machine to actually be viable, it needed this crucial foundational layer.
Think of an OS as the essential software that manages all the hardware resources, the memory, the inputs and outputs, and provides a stable platform so other third-party programs can actually run. IBM had the physical hardware architecture for their upcoming personal computer ready to go, but without an operating system, that shiny new machine was effectively a very expensive paperweight. Understanding the sheer importance of this technical bottleneck is the key to understanding what is arguably the greatest business deal of the 20th century. Fast forward a few years to July 1980. At this point, IBM is the absolute titan of the commercial computer world. They are building a brand new personal computer, the IBM PC, and they're in a massive rush to get it to market. Initially, they approached Microsoft just to write the basic programming language for it. But, like we just talked about, they also desperately needed an operating system. IBM originally tried to strike a deal with a different company called Digital Research, but those negotiations completely fell apart. So suddenly, this massive door was left wide open, and Microsoft was perfectly positioned to just step right in. Here's the crazy part, though. Microsoft didn't actually have an operating system ready to go. So what did they do? They just went out and bought one. They found an OS called 86DOS, which was created by a guy named Tim Patterson over at Seattle Computer Products. Microsoft bought the full exclusive rights to this software for $50,000. Think about that, a one-time fee of just $50,000. They brought Patterson on board to adapt it for the new IBM PC, and they rebranded the whole thing as PC-DOS. In the grand scheme of the multi-trillion-dollar tech industry, $50K is absolute pocket change. But what Microsoft did with it next, that completely revolutionized the architecture of the entire computing market.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is the specific contract they struck with IBM. Bill Gates did not offer to transfer the copyright of the operating system over to IBM. Why? Because he had the incredible foresight to realize that IBM's physical hardware could, and absolutely would, be cloned by competitors. If the hardware was going to be copied and commoditized anyway, the real power would lie in the software that ran it all. By keeping the rights, Microsoft was able to license their own version, called MS-DOS, to every single company building an IBM-compatible clone. The physical box just became a commodity, right? But Microsoft software, that became the universal, irreplaceable standard.
But as you know, the tech industry moves fast, and they couldn't stay in that text-based DOS era forever. Over at Apple, they were already captivating consumers with the Macintosh and its new graphical user interface, or GUI. Microsoft knew that if they wanted to maintain their absolute dominance, they had to take the leap from that blinking command prompt to a fully graphical desktop. And this wasn't just about making computing look pretty. It represented a massive, massive leap in software complexity. They had to totally shift how the underlying operating system managed resources to support things like overlapping windows, clicking with a mouse, and eventually full multitasking.
Watching this interface evolution unfold reveals such a clear trajectory. You start back in 1980 with the IBM partnership, which cemented MS-DOS as the absolute standard. Then, jump to November 1985 and Microsoft launches the first retail version of Windows 1.0. It basically grew organically out of DOS over the next decade, adding those visual elements, mouse support, and clickable icons. And then we hit the massive cultural phenomenon in 1995, Windows 95. This release finally hid that old, clunky DOS prompt by default, giving the masses a fully visual, super user-friendly desktop experience right out of the box. It firmly cemented that complex software, not the hardware, was the primary way humans were going to interact with technology from then on.
So, when we step back and summarize why all of this really matters, we see a complete and total inversion of the tech industry. Thanks to these massive technical leaps, from the Altair basic bluff to the absolute genius of the MS-DOS licensing and the ongoing architectural evolution of Windows, hardware completely transitioned from being the main value driver into just a commoditized vessel. Software, purely because it was universal, endlessly scalable, and highly profitable, took the throne. It is the exact reason a personal computer transformed from an inaccessible, room-sized calculator into an absolute staple on every single desk in the world.
Which brings us right to where we are today, standing on the shoulders of this massive paradigm shift. We've seen how a teenage hacker's total obsession, a high-stakes bluff, and a frankly brilliant licensing strategy completely rewrote the rules of technology. But as we know, innovation never actually stops. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. If software defined the first 50 years of personal computing and shaped the modern world as we know it, what breakthrough is going to define the next 50? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what comes next.